order to function, teaching at 8 o'clock in the morning class, I can't just wake up the next day at like 12 or something like that. You need to maintain like a steady schedule.
What a cool artist we're featuring today, and it's just been so great to get to chat with him for the podcast and get to know him a little bit better. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we're talking today with Fumi Tomita, who just released, I think like yesterday, a new album called Celebrating Bird, a tribute to Charlie Parker. Now, this new release from Fumi obviously explores the music of Bird in a fresh and creative way, and we dig into that, what it was like growing up in New York City, which I always find fascinating, moving from being a full-time freelancer into the world of academia and his current position at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, surprises of the academic career path, and much more. Definitely looking forward to connecting with him in the future for the podcast. And let's get into this conversation with Fumi Tomita.
We had a bunch of like tornadoes here and stuff like that. So
really,
I don't know, there's been some weird not tornadoes. I mean, they're like bad storms, but they're small tornadoes. Apparently, Hartford, Connecticut had some. So so there's been a lot of the towns around here don't have electricity. So
really, I didn't realize Connecticut was tornado country. I don't think
neither did I actually until like yesterday.
That's terrifying. I grew up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is that is right in that band of states. So I have lots of memories of being a little kid and going down to the basement and hearing those things. I still have nightmares about tornadoes. That's one of snakes and tornadoes.
Snakes and tornadoes. Yeah. Snakes are not a good thing. Yeah.
So where are you up? Because you're at Amherst, right? Or you teach there at least. Do you live in that area too, or?
Yeah, I live in the area. I live in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Okay.
I've been living here for like 5 years now. When I got the job, but I'm from New York originally.
Yeah.
And I lived there for a long time.
What's it been like not being in New York these last 5 years? It's got to be a pretty big lifestyle change in many ways.
Yeah, it's definitely a lifestyle change. It took me a while. Also, I grew up in New York. So, so coming to, I first went to Rochester. So, and and then I went to Amherst. Rochester is like, I don't know, like 200,000, 300,000, 500,000 or something, or million, maybe, I don't know. And so Amherst, is like a small town of like 20,000 people and stuff like that. So I gradually went lower and lower from like 8 million people. So it's not, so it wasn't quite that much of a shock. It was definitely, it's definitely been a challenge to adjust. At the same time, I've discovered that even though it's quieter and I don't have as many opportunities to play and things like that, I've also been able to focus a lot more.
Yeah, and I mean, congratulations to you. I should have congratulated you 5 years ago, but I mean, that's like the advantages of having a job like what you have are so tremendous. I mean, for anybody, but especially like just having that space to work on creative projects. And I mean, it's just a massive lifestyle change, I'm sure, getting into academia. And there are not many spots like that. It's funny because I'll when I've worked with students in the past, they say, "Oh yeah, I'll go teach bass somewhere." And I said, hold on now. I remember looking in Chicago and saying, okay, you think there are jobs, but let's look. There are actually, there are 10 bass players in the Chicago Symphony and 6 in the Lyric Opera. And how many professorships involving bass are there in the city of Chicago? And the answer at the time was 0. It was like just adjunct jobs. So that's really cool. That's got to be. I'm sure it not being in New York City, proper, that's got to, as a jazz player in particular, I think that's got, but man, having some space and having the institution and just being able to kind of dig into things that interest you has got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, definitely lifestyle change. It was pretty strange, but at the same time, the job enabled me to do a lot of things that was difficult to do when I was living in New York. Also, getting the job, I mean, you're right, because I mean, usually in general in academia, actually, bass players, there's not that many full-time jobs for bass players, actually. And my position is actually, it's kind of funny. I'm kind of like a sideman job in a way, because I call myself Jazz Etc. because I teach jazz bass and jazz combo, but also I'm also the academic person in the jazz department area. So I teach jazz history and jazz ed classes.
Well, yeah, it was great because I was actually looking through. I was on your website and I was like, oh yeah, I remember reading your article in Bass World, the one with the George Vance cover, and that's cool. So I pulled that back up and read it again, and that whole just equipment thing seems to be something that you've spent a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've always been kind of a gearhead in some ways and stuff like that. Like I love Fender Rhodes and basses and electric basses and stuff like that. Acoustic bass is a little different just because it's so expensive and stuff like that. So, but you know, and just in thinking about gear and stuff like that, I realized like for music educators, like who are like trying to get like a jazz band together, I mean, like if you don't have the right gear, the right sound and stuff like that, it's kind of an important part. And it's not something, obviously, I'm not telling schools, oh, you got to buy like, $20,000 worth of equipment, but just to kind of plant the idea into students' minds that this is an important part because, you got to learn how to play the bass. After a certain point, though, there's a time when like you need to kind of adjust your sound and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I got to be careful with gear. Because I have a tendency to get obsessed and go down the rabbit hole. And I actually currently don't own an electric bass, kind of on purpose, because I used to teach electronic music, kind of wearing another hat like a decade ago, okay. and I have probably $10,000 worth of gear in my closet here, just like like all sorts of MIDI controllers, and I mean I still use some of them for fun, but and then I go down that road with camera equipment or stuff like that. So I have to be careful. I definitely love my gear as well.
Yeah. That's awesome. Wow. It's great that you got the podcast and everything. It's great for the bass community and stuff like that. So, to have that platform.
Well, it's a fun thing to do. The way I've been thinking of it recently is it's kind of one of those things that I should be doing with my time anyway, even if there wasn't a podcast, because it's kind of like a self-improvement project in a way. And just being able to reach out to people and get a chance to, because I would want to be chatting with you anyway, and probably people who listen, they're probably sick of hearing me say this, but like I would want to hang out with you anyway and talk about whatever tech or bass or what you're up to. But we're also busy, right? And so the show is just kind of like a nice frame to carve out some time to do something. It's like I'm just living my life, and the podcast is this byproduct of. But it's like, and through it, I listen to albums I might not have listened to, which I love. And I love going down the rabbit hole. So I was like looking up, like you put out something in 2019 too, I think, right? I was looking at yeah. So that's got to have been fun to have some more time and space. And hopefully that counts towards your academic, work at UMass. I'm not sure if it does, but it's really cool, man. I went out for a run this morning. I run over to the Golden Gate Bridge, which is an epic run. I try not to flex on that too much on social media. but then on the way back, I was like walking down the beach, put on your album, listening to through, and just it's really cool. It's really cool what you're up to. And I don't have the physical copy in my hands yet. It may be at my front desk in the building yet, but
okay.
I will soon. But we could talk about a billion things, but like tell me about the idea for the album. And it's I got the title here. It's Celebrating Bird, right?
Yeah, Celebrating Bird.
Okay, yeah. Tell me about the idea. Yeah.
I mean, after I did the last record, The Elephant Vanishes, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit more like simpler, like concept wise. I guess like being in academia, like I'm being pushed towards like, or I'm thinking about like, broader like concepts for records as opposed to like a collection of songs. So, and then, I was thinking of what I could do, and I knew that this was the Charlie Parker Centennial year. And so I thought, you know what, I love Charlie Parker. I always play his tunes, and I love his tunes. So I thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity to write some songs in the style and or inspired by Charlie Parker. And there's also a record that I've been talking with my friend David Detweiler, who's actually featured on the record, and we met actually when we were students at Eastman some years ago, about 2012, and we've always, we did a trio record in 2015, and that was mostly standards, and so I've we wanted to play together again and stuff like that. So we thought, we would collaborate on this record and stuff. So
it's cool. It's great. It's great playing. You sound great. Your sound is great. And being a gearhead, like what were you using on that? I'm just curious. To take me through we just had a Neumann on you or something, or were you
like recording wise and stuff?
Yeah, recording wise. Yeah.
It was done at Michael Brorby's recording studio in Brooklyn. And I think that's the place where all of the Positone records are recorded. And so he kind of has his basic setup. Actually, to be honest with you, with the recording and stuff, like I'm kind of, I don't know. I'm like a,
you just go in and play.
No, I just like, yeah. No, I'll let Michael take care of that end of things and stuff like that. So I guess like with gear and stuff, like the recording stuff, I don't know, I know a little bit about microphones and stuff like that, but I trusted his judgment and stuff like that. So, I knew the Positone made the records there. My friend Art Hirohara, who's on the record, has also talked about it. I've heard about this place since, years and years ago when I was a student at Manhattan School of Music, actually, like 20 years ago. So I knew it had a good reputation, so I trusted it.
I'm so curious. I love Chet. Like we have a lot in common, but our Venn diagram doesn't overlap as much as some people I chat, because I play jazz gigs once a decade and that kind of thing, and do a little recording. Like I've done a few things here and there, but I'm always fascinated by like the experience of going into the studio in different studios and like the vibe of the studio and how that might affect what you do. Like, have you found like this most recent record? Like, how much does setting and place affect the process for you?
That's interesting. When I first did my first recording, like in the early 2000s, I was like, whoa, like everything was new, and it felt, it was like a shocking experience. Mm-hmm. I think it's like that actually for a lot of people, but anyway, but on this record and the one before that, I just went in and I played. I didn't think too much about like the surroundings. I knew the people there. I guess I'm at an age where I don't really, I'm going to go in and play. It won't sound maybe like exactly how I would like it, but it's going to sound good. Like, so I try not to get affected too much by like the performance. I guess just that, just learning to adjust to different situations as a sideman for a long time. And even here, in Amherst, as working, in academia, like, just always adjusting to new situations and just kind of plowing through with what you've got.
Did you imagine yourself, if we go back to like 2000 when you were doing that thing, did you imagine yourself in academia? Was that something you saw? At some point it came into your mind, I know, just with your education, but like, when did that start to become a path for you? Actually,
it's funny that path, I started thinking about it around the time I made my first recording, actually.
Oh, wow.
It was 2003, 2002. And at that time I decided I wanted to study ethnomusicology. So something, completely different. And I studied a couple different things. Ethnomusicology is basically the study of music in culture. And so at first, I use it as a platform to kind of look at my roots, Japanese roots. So I was studying some Japanese music from southern Japan and Okinawa. But then, and then I was like, it's a little academic. And so I started studying jazz. But then I felt that I'm too much, like I was, I didn't quite connect to it. Like I felt like I was too much. It's hard to be a part studying jazz in culture when I don't know. I didn't feel comfortable doing it. And so I decided, like, okay, I can't do that. But at that time, I also didn't feel very comfortable getting a jazz doctorate, which is what I ended up doing. So it took me a couple of years to kind of like come around to that. But in that time period, actually, I discovered I was teaching a lot, and I discovered I really liked teaching. And then I started to really get into it, to ways to like get students to practice and things like that. I found, I work on all these arrangements. I thought, you know what, I'm spending a lot of time on this. I'm not getting paid that much. I thought, you know what, I might as well try to find a way I can, get a full-time job on this and stuff. So yeah, that's how that kind of started.
It's super interesting. The whole. I love teaching too. Ironically, this is the least I've taught in my adult life right now. I think I have a whopping one student and then one adult student I see occasionally. But it's still something I think about a lot. And I guess I teach in other ways, doing different projects. But it's I used to teach at DePaul University in Chicago. I was the class. Yeah, it's kind of an old school model, I guess, but you come in as a jazz studies major and you take with who you want to take with for your jazz lessons, but then you get this bozo over here who's supposed to teach you some quote unquote classical lessons. And
sure.
And it always felt, I was thrilled to teach at DePaul, but I always felt like I had no idea what I was, how to best help these folks out. Like, should I be working on the Kusevitsky concerto with people, or taking them through like material they might teach? Or I know that at least depending on who they were studying with, there wasn't necessarily a ton of technique in their quote unquote jazz lessons. So sometimes I broke out like what I knew when I was taking some jazz lessons back at Northwestern. So I think I was there 9 years feeling like I was doing a bad job all 9 years. So
pretty much summarizes it. How we feel. You just keep trying and keep banging your head on the wall.
Well, how do you? I'd love to, like, even just with bass lessons, because I think there are so many different approaches to bass lessons in general, but I think maybe even more so in terms of jazz lessons. Kelly Sill used to teach at DePaul. He was one of the teachers while I was there, and my students would come in and they'd be like, "They're not bass lessons, they're life lessons." And I don't think I ever heard one note being played. And when I walked by the bass studio door, then some new came in. I heard a lot more playing. Not that either approach is they're both great teachers in their own right. But how do you approach jazz lessons? That's a huge topic. So sorry, but
yeah, I see what you're saying, because there's some teachers who are more mentors. Than teachers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, I try to, because I was teaching like little kids for so long, I tend to take the teacher approach, stuff like that. I blend in the mentor stuff as well, but I'm definitely pretty strong on like, trying to help students to transcribe. That's usually the hardest thing, actually, because students, I had a hard time, and students today still have a hard time hearing the harmonies in jazz and all the notes. And plus on bass, acoustic bass, Paul Chambers isn't always 100% in tune. So you're always making, and when you write it down, those rhythms aren't exactly like eighth notes for, per se. So you're doing a lot of like, it's not so much transcription as it's like your interpretation of what the solo is and stuff like that. But I try to, I usually focus on basic stuff like, metronome. I've been actually writing a lot of jazz etudes for my students, and I found that's worked out pretty well as a way to have students play, like, and then I insert like techniques, so they're emphasizing like this change from pinky to middle finger, but in the context of a jazz piece and stuff like that. So I've been working on that stuff, and it's been helpful because it's an etude, and so they work on stuff, but at the same time it's based on a tune, like Autumn Leaves or something like that. And so they, at the same time, they learn about improvisation. And so I try to throw in a bunch of different things. It's very challenging though, teaching. And I still take the same approach I did before, which is to have cater my lessons to the particular student's needs. Because every bass player comes at it differently and has a different set of skills that they're stronger at than others. So like I have a student, he transcribed Rush in high school, so he has like no problem like transcribing stuff. So so I don't need to work on that with him, because he nails it and he gets that stuff immediately. And I have another student has a hard time transcribing a Motown, not Motown, that those are really hard, but like simpler bass lines. So so it's just a matter of like it's kind of like a mixing board. Like you have all your ideas, and some are higher than others and stuff like that. So like depending on how much time you put in certain ideas.
That's interesting. The jazz etude thing I think is super cool. I have a friend named Bill Harrison who's in Chicago. He gigging bassist, also a psychotherapist, which is kind of interesting mixture of jazz bass sideman and psychotherapist. But he did a bunch of etudes maybe a couple of years ago and sent them my way, and I played through them, and he just wanted some thoughts. But it's really interesting, and like little germs of tunes. Is that common? Because it seems to make so much sense to me. Like look at my music over here. I've got my Sturm etudes that are all based on actual pieces, but they're good. That it seems like a smart way to approach, just building capacity. Do a lot of people do that, or are you familiar?
I don't think so. I'm not entirely sure. It's not something I talk with a lot of people, but I know there's a couple of books out there, and I've picked them up and I've gone through them. Jim Snodero, I think that's how you pronounce his name, has a bunch of jazz etudes, and they're really good actually. But I think they're geared towards all instruments, and so they're out there. But I don't think that a lot of people go that direction. I mean, I also practice, like, I love the Storch Harabe etudes and stuff like that. The first 30, man, I've been shedding those I still practice. They kick my ass still after 10 years, man. It's great. So, I mean, I love like practicing etudes. So I thought, hey, there needs to be some jazz etudes. And I used to use Charlie Parker tunes as etudes. And then I was like, you know what, I should, I should try to adapt it to bass a little bit more, because some of them are, but I mean, some of them are just too difficult and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't grow up with etudes. None of my teachers were really that into etudes. I know a lot of other instrumentalists that I've worked with or their teachers are, and so I sort of came to etudes as an adult, and I love it. I try to do something every day. I never really. I'm not. If someone asks me to like articulate why I do it, I don't have like a great reason, but I know it. I know it's good for my musical hygiene just to do something. So I've been going through this cycle of all 110 Sturm etudes, one a day. And it's kind of fun to come back and I date it on my iPad. I put the day I worked on it. So it's fun to see October 12th, 2016 or something like that. Wow. And it's kind of a neat feeling doing that. But I find that helpful. Those for me, and I love the Storch Rabe. I've done similar things with those, but those or the Sturm, they're like, there's enough challenge there to test you without being so insanely hard that it's like discouraging. It kind of hits that kind of flow point for me.
Yes, yeah. Once you get over the first one, I remember when I played the first one, it felt like, oh man, this is long. I can't do this. But once you get used to kind of his style, then they get easier and stuff like that. So
you grew up in New York City? Yeah,
I grew up in New York City. Yeah,
wow.
In Manhattan.
Wow.
Yeah, I grew up in 70s and 87th Street. But I actually didn't play any music when I was, I didn't start playing. I didn't even listen or play any music until I was in high school.
Really?
Big Led Zeppelin fan. And so I played drums first. My mom was like, no drums. So I bought a guitar, typical story, like everybody else or, most people and stuff. So, but then, but guitar, I had a hard time moving my fingers around like everyone else. Mm-hmm. And so I heard bass was easier. So I said, okay, cool. I'll go with bass. And, and I don't know, I've always been attracted to the bass. I was at a guitar camp actually. And I remember the bass player had he had like this personality. He used to there'd be all these lulls in the concert and he would play things like the Barney Miller theme, like on electric bass. I don't know if you know it, but it starts with an electric bass intro and stuff like that. So you would play that. So I kind of like that aspect. So I was attracted to that. So I was like, oh wow, there's like something with the bass that you can do. So I ended up on bass.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. It's. I love how people get to bass because it's rarely my parents chose bass for me. Once in a while, but usually I was at a music festival in Tijuana a couple years ago, and we all were sitting around the table, and we all just said, I think there were 8 or 10 of us. We all just said like, how'd you get into bass? And first person, heavy metal. Next one, metal. It's like everybody had a secret former life as a heavy metal bass player, and
I played metal.
Of course. Did you go to Mcgill for your?
Yes.
Okay, so well, great school first of all, but what drew you to Mcgill? What were you doing there, just degree wise?
Oh, I see. Okay, so when I was in New York, I actually went to a French school, and
Oh, wow.
for elementary school. So I'm actually fluent in French. And when I was thinking about college, I remember growing up in New York, me and my friends in high school, we wanted to get out of New York. New York in the 80s was a very different place and stuff like that. So, it was there's still lots of, parts you didn't go to and stuff like that. So I remembered all of that. So I wanted to leave. And I wanted something really different. Mm-hmm. And so Canada was attractive, also because it's a bilingual country technically and stuff. So I thought, I'm curious if, so I went. That was basically, why I wanted to go. So I ended up there. I actually first went to York University in Toronto, and then transferred after a couple of years to Mcgill. And the reason I transferred to Mcgill was because, I was playing electric bass, and, I was just kind of I was just figuring it out. But I wanted to play acoustic bass because I was a big jazz fan and all this and that. And I knew that at Mcgill, they forced you to play acoustic bass. So I was like, okay. You're going to force me to do it. I'll do it. I'll take the challenge. So I started when I was just a couple months short of my 20th birthday.
Wow, it's crazy to. I guess it's not crazy. I've noticed over the years how many bassists I know that started around that age that are professional work. I mean, Scott Pingle here in the San Francisco Symphony, principal bass of the San Francisco Symphony, started bass at I think 18. So that's something when people ask, "Am I too old?" It's like, well, you can get to the top of the field with, and I think the same might be true for some other instruments. Like I know some brass players start kind of late, and some other things. I don't talk to a lot of violinists who are playing in the LA Phil and started at 18, but bass seems to be, although I guess it could be possible, but bass seems to be one of those that is receptive, or a little more I don't know what the word is, but you can dive in a little later and still go pretty far.
It's more of a thing on acoustic bass and stuff like that. So that's right. Scott Pingle, he was actually at MSM when I was there. I was wondering.
Well, we probably have a bunch of people that we know in common. I was curious about that. Whether you two overlap. So it's so interesting to me, people who are from big cities like New York, or I lived in Chicago for a long time and I'm here in San Francisco. And because I grew up in, South Dakota, which I can't say anything bad about South Dakota because my mom listens to the podcast and she'll be disappointed. But, a lot of people I knew, including me, we wanted to get to the city. We wanted to go somewhere big and experience, something besides cornfields. But I've heard similar things to some of the high school students I've worked with here in San Francisco. They're looking for just something different. So I imagine Canada was probably a big change from late 80s New York, or
Oh yeah, when I was there, they thought I was nuts. They couldn't believe it. They're like, "Why are you coming here? Like, New York is where you want to be." And I was like, "No, man, you don't know." It's funny because my Canadian friends, who've lived in New York since, after a while, they're like, "Get me out of here," because New York's kind of a crazy place and stuff like that. So like, yeah. I mean I guess that's true. Wherever you grow up, you kind of want something, taste of something else and stuff like that. So for some people anyway, that's the way it was for me. I wanted something different.
Oh, so I have this wonderful former student who just finished her first year in Cleveland and is from San Francisco. And I remember I had the talk with her. I was like, "Okay, have you been to places like Cleveland in December?" And I think the answer was not much. And New York's cold, Canada's cold, a little colder, but yeah, that shockaroo. People from the Bay, I love the people from places like Florida or California or something. That first winter in the Northeast or Chicago or other such places, that's a rude awakening.
Yeah, I mean, people like to talk about the weather being kind of a banal topic, but man, it's important, like where you live, because you got to live with it every day.
It's been so weird for me, just personally, having had that worry basically eliminated. In Cali, there is no weather here. It is either foggy or sunny or light rain. I don't even think you get anything beyond light rain. The news reports it. It's like da da da. Here comes the rain, but it's like I step outside and at most an umbrella, usually not even. But man, digging my car out in Chicago or like slipping on the ice, headed down into the L or that sort of thing. Yeah, it is a very and then the base safety and all that sort of stuff. It's not fooling around.
Yeah, it's different. I used to live in Portland, Oregon for a year, and I remember that there was like a winter storm, and it was like it wasn't that much. It was like, but they closed everything. I was supposed to have a gig that night, and they canceled it and stuff like that. So it's all relative.
It is for sure. And now here in San Francisco, I think of Portland as like a terrible climate, which is funny because I remember visiting Portland back in my Midwestern days and just being totally it's like I didn't care if it rained a little. There weren't 6 feet of snow on the ground, and there wasn't. Yeah, but I've gotten softer these 5 years. I went up and subbed with Oregon Symphony for a couple of weeks not too long ago, and they had one of those winter storms, and I was like, oh no, what do I do? It's an inch of snow. Yeah, I just lost the coping mechanism. But what drew you to Portland? How did that fit into the mix for you?
So this was after Mcgill. I graduated, and my then girlfriend, we wanted to move to. Actually, we were going to move to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. But and so we drove across Canada and then down to San Francisco. But we ended up staying in Portland, and the reasoning for that was just because there were more gigs at the time, and it was like it would have been a quicker transition to living there. I mean, any big city, it takes a while to kind of establish yourself. But Portland was like quick. I mean, I had a gig every Saturday night that I lived there.
Wow.
Stuff like that. So it was pretty seamless and stuff like that to settle in. This was 97. And so there was like, and there was a good scene there. There was like a lot of places to play for jazz, and there was a lot of places to go and jam sessions, all this and that. So it was pretty, it was at that time, Portland, there was a lot of people moving to Portland. Mm-hmm. So it was like a real vibrant like city, kind of. I was just there last year. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's grown so much. So.
Yeah, it's a great time. My brother actually lives in Portland. He moved to Portland maybe 2 years ago, and I love getting up there and spending some time. Chuck Israels lives in Portland, and I've had some good hangs with Chuck Israels and Colin Corner, who's principal bass for Oregon Symphony. So yeah, I love that town. It's a great town. Okay, that's cool that you made it out here. And then did Eastman come after that?
No, Eastman came like. Was recent actually.
Oh.
After some time that I lived in New York. So when I studied ethnomusicology, I never finished my degree. Mm-hmm. And I felt really bad about that. I was basically ABD for my master's. And I was like, I felt really bad because I wanted to get the doctorate, and I was like, oh man, I recorded some music and I never released it. So I felt like, I need to kind of finish the things that I'd started. Mm. And so I released all the music that I recorded at that time. And the other thing was like, all right, I'm going to get a doctorate. And so I decided I wanted to get it. I didn't want to spend 10 years writing a dissertation. So I opted for a jazz degree, where a DMA, doctorate in musical arts, where it's sort of performance based. And that felt like something that I could manage. And so just to have the degree. And in the back of my mind too, I was thinking it'd be nice to have a college teaching job after that. But my motivation was to sort of complete the ethnomusicology degree I never completed back in 2003.
Wow, so that was sort of nagging at you all those years.
Yeah. Okay. Just kind of unfinished business. I was like, you know what, I got to do this. So I took care of it, and I got really lucky. I got this job, after I graduated. So.
Well, those years then, were you gigging in the city, working in New York, living in New York? Those years.
Yeah, I was gigging in New York. I was teaching a lot. I was just playing a lot. I was kind of on the scene there and stuff like that. So this was between 98 and like 2012 that I lived there.
Okay.
And during those years, I spent a lot of time, just gigging and things like that. And it's sort of like, I felt at a certain point that it was hard for me to I couldn't figure a way how to change what I was doing. Like it was difficult to level up, so to speak. To kind of like get better gigs and better this and better that, and so I felt like I needed to do something else. Plus, I had all these other things that was kind of like nagging at me. And so completing those really helped a lot in hindsight, because I was able to do more.
Yeah. No, I know that feeling. I think that happens to a lot of people who are gigging musicians, freelancing in whatever capacity. For me, in the classical world, I sort of found my level in Chicago, and I was just sort of like at that. I had the regional orchestras I was doing. I was getting called to sub with the same groups. But like, if you just picked any year for me between like 2001 and 2008 or something like that, they were like identical years. I was just kind of like living this. I realized at a certain point I was just like living the same year over and over, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I decided to go back to school and kind of just stop trying to move up or anything. And like, ironically, going back to school and thinking I'm not going to play all these gigs, I started writing about gigs. I started doing the podcast, and that actually led to better gigs. It was just hilarious. Like my work, after deciding kind of to just blow up my freelance career, ironically, it made it stronger.
Yeah. I mean, I've known about your blog for a long, long time and stuff. So just from being on Talkbass and stuff like that, like it's, I feel like any bass player who's like, it's active, going to know about it, because there's almost nothing out there, on the double bass, on the bass, in general. So like in the world of like, in modern world of podcasts and stuff like that, like, musicians, we tend to be, we're all on Facebook and maybe Instagram, but nobody's on Twitter, things like that. It's like,
it's true.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I just decided to go do something else, and I decided to go actually become a high school orchestra teacher. And so I had been preparing for auditions, and so I'd been spending 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours a day. In hindsight, I realized I was wasting a lot of time, not practicing the right things. But all of a sudden I just said, well, I'm not going to practice 6 hours a day anymore. What am I going to do? And all of a sudden I went from like doing bass all the time to like having all these hours. So for me, I just like projects. So I just started writing about stuff, and here we are now.
Yeah, that's great. And projects really help out and stuff like that, kind of like, so towards like finishing things and stuff like that. So there's like structured and stuff like that, because bass, like, I feel like I could always practice it, but it's like never ending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At a certain point, you need to, to group it out somehow and stuff like that. So.
Totally. And for me, I don't know how it is for you, but I'm guessing it might be similar, but I always like to have a few projects going that are in like different phases. And then if that's like, I don't know what the number is for me. I guess it's somewhere between 3 and 5. And almost always one of those projects is going to tank horribly, and one of them is going to be way more interesting, and a couple of them are going to be So do you kind of have a few different things in stages of development at most of the time? Okay.
Definitely. Oh yeah. And some of them, like, are on the back burner. Like, it's always been my dream to do a solo bass record. And and when we were first quarantined, I thought, oh, this is the opportunity, man. I can finally put all this stuff together. And I was like, by that I was exhausted, so I was like, man, I haven't done that. But it's like, that's like something I've done like periodically. There's there's like a book project I'm working on now. There's like, there's all these things that are in various stages of development. Basically, whatever deadline is closest is the one that I'm working on.
Oh man, I'd love to hear that potential future solo album. I think it's super interesting. The people the solo bass albums that are kind of in the jazz world to some capacity, I think like Larry Grenadier's The Gleaners is like a good example. And I was sitting in, back when we had concerts, I was sitting in at SF Jazz here in the city, and it was a Friday night, and Larry came through, so I was listening to Larry play, and it occurred to me, I'm at one of the main performance venues in this city, and I'm listening to essentially a solo double bass recital. And like, I don't even know if certainly jazz wouldn't be the label I would put on that concert necessarily, although I guess that, we don't have to talk about what is jazz. That's it can be a quagmire, but it was just really interesting to me. If I could have been transported to an International Society of Bassists convention and be listening to, it was just very cool. And it was cool to see all these people out to see solo bass. And I just think it's super interesting the way people have tackled a project like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because that's right. Larry Grenadier's album, it's a great album. I've got it and stuff. So, and let's see, I don't jazz albums like Dave Holland did at least one. I think he did two, and it's definitely it's pretty challenging.
Yeah.
To maintain to maintain the kind of the variety
Yeah.
of like material that you use for bass, and because it's a very for one song. I mean, on the Elephant Vanishes album, I have like one solo piece, but that's one piece that's surrounded by like 9 other tunes. So it fits fine. But like to do 50 minutes of the same thing, it's definitely like a high water benchmark there.
Yeah, it is. I remember in Strings magazine back in the early 90s reading an interview with Edgar Meyer about this very topic. And Edgar was saying how hard it is to sustain, he was talking about that, just having enough variety. And he said, like, even just bass and piano for an hour, he finds really hard, or with a couple solo pieces too. So, yeah, I mean, it's cool with Larry Grenadier's. I mean, just to see it live and see all the alternate tunings that he was doing, which you can sort of hear on the Gleaners, but it was just to see it in person. I mean, he was moving things up and down and changing things through the entire album. But what have you probably don't have enough developed on something like what have you, is this potential solo album that may or may not happen at some point? Do you have some pieces that you've written or that you got?
I do. And so I have a couple arrangements of standards, and like I do Django. Django actually works out really well. There's actually a couple of years ago, these two Canadian bass players released a duo album, and they played Django as like one guy plays six string electric bass, Alain Caron. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No, I'll look him up. Yeah.
And the other one's an acoustic bass player who's actually my teacher. That's how I know these guys. And so they did Django, and it works really. It sounds great actually with two basses. And I realized you can do it on acoustic bass. I mean, the fingering isn't great and stuff like that, but it does work and stuff like that. And so that one I managed to make it work out pretty well because there's a key change and stuff like that. And I can incorporate some of the arrangements and things like that, but it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to like come up with new ideas. And I did one on this Jerry Mulligan song. Actually, the title is Festive Minor. And that works out pretty well because I play like Jerry Mulligan's solo and Art Farmer's solo on it and stuff like that. But it's very hard. If Edgar Meyer says, I mean, that just says it all. I mean, come on. I mean, he's like, he's amazing. Because never mind like what you play, it's how you because it takes a lot of endurance to to physically be able to just a 3-hour jazz gig can be tough can be tough, but man, like when it's all you doing everything for even half an hour, that's tough. You really got to stay in shape.
Yeah.
I did this like literally. You got to. I feel like I got to like go back to the gym. In order to.
I know. Well, it's such a different level of conditioning to me with my like very low percentage of jazz playing. But like anytime I would get called for a jazz gig, I'd have to like get back in some sort of shape because it's one thing to go play an orchestra rehearsal or concert or a week. You're playing a lot, but there's a lot of downtime too. Much more downtime than a jazz bass player. I remember talking to Rob Kassinger from the Chicago Symphony, who also plays a fair amount of jazz. In fact, he moved to New York City. Yeah, he went to Manhattan School, I believe, or Juilliard. I can't, but studied with Homer Mensch. But he moved there to play jazz and still plays a lot. But he says, like the blister thing is for real if you're not doing it enough. And so we were sharing some of his techniques for trying to avoid that.
That's when you mentioned jazz lessons. That's one of the like blister maintenance is like something that inevitably comes up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what do you, since it came up here, what do you recommend or what do you do? Because I think just about anybody who's played any jazz has found themselves in a pickle, right? Like, oh, I'm playing without an amp, and maybe that was a bad decision on this gig. And you look down and you see the blisters forming and you got 2.5 more hours on the gig. Like, what do you recommend or what do you do?
I mean, in fact, I still do actually to this day. I still carry I bought like sewing needles, and like you can buy them like it comes in a little packet, and I keep it in my bass case because if you get a blister, I mean, I was taught to pop it immediately.
Yeah.
And then you got to, and then cover it. And I still keep my blister, maintenance package in my case, like the needles and bandages. Nowadays, I didn't know they make liquid bandages, and those are pretty good too.
Oh, wow.
Those help. Those help out. I was in Florida. I was doing some gigs out there with other people's basses, and like that's just going to happen. You're borrowing school bass. I mean, you're going to get. My fingers were wrecked. I was like, oh man, this is terrible. Like I got to practice more or something. But I realized it's the bass because the strings are all this and that. So I had to, fortunately I had my maintenance package there. So
it's so hard with borrowing basses. I mean, I decided after 9/11, just no more flying with my bass ever. That's just the rule I made for myself. So I only auditioned at things I could drive to. And so I find myself on borrowed basses a lot. And I have this sort of like, when I'm working on some solo, I play a lot of solo rep at events and that sort of thing. And I have pieces that are they're ready, but not on a borrowed bass. I have those levels, like things with a lot of harmonics or very specific things, and then some pieces that are a little more tolerant of whatever. But it's tough. And I've thought a lot about how challenging it must be, especially if you're improvising a lot. If you're because I'm never improvising anything, but I think that's an added level, because if you're fighting with the gear, all of a sudden it's like trying to speak underwater or something. I imagine it's just got to really mess with your creative flow.
A little bit. I mean, the biggest thing is how the bass is set up, like where the D is on the G string, and how it's set up. Like, because some basses, I'm used to where the G harmonic is on my bass for thumb position, but other basses, I kind of have to, I basically have to learn that in the first tune. And fortunately, since I'm I play walking bass lines and stuff like that. That's a great time to to do that. I'm not playing a solo right away. If I had to do a solo, well, that'd be I'd be stressed out. It'd be kind of nuts. But it's definitely, if I feel like I can't, I don't feel comfortable, going up high on the neck or stuff like that. Okay, so I can't do that. So it's all these micro adjustments that's going on, 100 miles per hour in my head as I'm playing stuff like that. So okay, can't do that. Okay, and. Yeah,
that's a good point. I guess you could just choose to eliminate a portion of the bass until it starts to kind of get into your subconscious.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a drag because I do like to go high up and stuff like that. But if one of the basses I played was really, the action was really high, and I still did, but it's work. I mean, I remember feeling it and stuff like that. So
how much playing now? Obviously, at this current moment, the answer is probably not much at all. But in terms of with the academic career and then the playing you were doing back when you were full-time freelancing in New York and teaching, I mean, the hours. Another reason why I never went down the jazz path, besides the fact that I was pretty mediocre at it, was I would do gigs and I realized I'm out till 2, not every night, but out till 2, or then 2 and then some late night place, and I'm don't go to sleep till 4 or 5, and I get up and I'm like a stand-up comedian lifestyle, and that's such a different lifestyle in large part from I have a class at 9 a.m. or Monday through Friday 8 a.m. There we go. So and I know that you went back to school, so you probably had a little bit of transition, but if you just think back to those days and then maybe these last 3 to 5 years, how has it been for you, just in terms of that lifestyle versus what must be a relatively different lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, when I was teaching and playing and stuff, I don't think I didn't get up before 9 a.m. unless I had to, something like 9, even later than that and stuff like that. Because sometimes stay out late, if you stay out late till yeah. So, but it's definitely been a challenge these days because I do teach 8 a.m. classes 3 out of 4 semesters. So, and then and so if I'm gigging while that's happening, I try to avoid gigs that on the nights before, those classes. But even so, in order to function, teaching at 8 o'clock in the morning class, I can't just wake up the next day at 12 or something like that. You need to maintain a steady schedule. And so that gets really difficult. It's challenging, even like in the the first days of the summer, if I get like a gig, if I get a bunch of gigs or a small tour or something like that, like it's an adjustment because I get really tired at like you get because I train myself to go to sleep a little bit earlier and stuff like that. So yeah, that's definitely challenging, but I'm not like gigging like nearly as much as I was before, so it's not like a huge problem. But it's definitely it's definitely an issue and stuff like that. So
well, something I've run into as I've gotten older too, for sure. And I've realized I really enjoy. We probably have more similar schedules than not in terms of like I don't teach at 8 a.m., but I'm doing stuff by 8 a.m. every day. And so I had a bunch of years in Chicago when I was teaching high school and still gigging. And if I left at 6 a.m. or later, I might not make it to work because of the traffic. So I had to be up by like 4:30 every day. And I played in a lot of orchestras that would either have concerts at night or rehearsals at night. And then I'd drive home. So I remember when I switched and stopped playing so much, it's like all the color came back into the world because I was getting some more sleep. But now these days, I have all these musician friends who, in more normal times, they're like, hey, let's meet up at 10 p.m. And I have to take a nap before take a nap, set an alarm for 9:30 p.m. I got to think long and hard because even I love subbing in the San Francisco Symphony. I feel so fortunate to do that. But, I do that for a week and luckily the rehearsals are during the day. But, it's that a weird, I get concerts till 10. Maybe we go out for a drink or something. I get home at midnight. I'm still a little wired, 1 a.m. And then and if I try to wake up in a normal schedule, I'm either like a zombie or then I get into that stand-up comedian kind of life or gigging musician kind of life where I wake up, eat lunch. So anyway, I'm just curious. But part of me likes that energy of the late nights and the chaos, and not that I'm that chaotic, but like I don't know. Part of that. Do you miss that in any way? Doing less of it, or?
Sometimes I do. At the same time, like because I've been writing more stuff, like then. That like I found that like I actually write better if I work in the morning.
Yeah. So you write in the morning. I was curious. I love knowing when. Is that a good time for you?
Yeah. Like I mean, I've never been a morning person, but in the last few years, like I've discovered that like I can be much more productive. Because then, and maybe it's because because you see the sunlight. I don't know what it is, but like it's been easier. And in recent years, I get up. Get myself up, get the coffee, and bam, I start writing to organize whatever it is I'm doing and stuff like that. Because sometimes as the day goes along, I guess maybe it's because I'm older too. Like I just get more tired, and it's like harder to focus, and it'll take longer to take care of one thing. But in the morning when I'm awake, it's like I can't do it. Okay, bam, next.
Yeah.
But like 5 o'clock, at night, I might be like, okay, I can do it one more time. Let me try it again. It's not as productive and stuff. So.
Yeah, well, I'm the exact same way. I realized several years ago, me personally, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. is like my magic time. That's when I try to and I can get work done in the afternoon. I can get work done in the evening. Sometimes I get good work done, but it's almost never as good as the morning stuff. It's usually a little more refining. So I've tried to like lean into that rhythm with what I do. But that's cool. So it sounds so you just sit down and go. That's kind of what you the way you write.
Coffee, I get the coffee. I have like the routine, and stuff like that. Meditate a little bit before all this and that and stuff. So just to kind of get into the zone, and then it's like I go, and it's like okay, usually I have like my to-do lists. I usually keep like index cards of like projects I'm working on. I have them right here and stuff. So, and then like I try to say, okay, what do I need to do? Like what's these days it's only like there's only 2 projects that I really got to like get cracking on and stuff like that. So it's pretty easy. But I take I'm always taking the temperature of like each of these projects that I'm doing and stuff like that. So.
I think things I just love talking to other creative people about, like how do you typically, if we're talking composition, how do you typically write? Do you write at the piano in front of Sibelius, at the bass, singing into your phone, outside? I mean, like what are some of the methods you use to generate these projects like this new album, ultimately?
I actually wrote them on piano. I tend to write on piano.
Okay.
For some reason, I played piano before I played bass, so I can play the chords in my left hand and the melody in my right hand and stuff. But actually, for this album, what I did was I actually adapted. I realized, I said, you know what, I want to play these on bass, so I should probably, so I kind of went back and forth between bass and piano. And actually, one of the tunes, the blues, Oceanology, I switched the key actually because I realized it fit really well in C. And so like with the open strings and all this and that, so I was like, okay, bam, there we go. So like I had it in B flat and stuff. So yeah, there's that. But with the last record though, I wrote it all on piano, everything on piano, like the chords and usually what I do is I did that on this album a little bit. But what I do is I'll take some motives, like with Charlie Parker, I'll take a motive that he did and then use that as the basis for the composition. On this one, what David and I decided was to write contrafacts. So meaning that we take the one of the songs that he wrote and then write a song based on those changes and stuff like that. And that's a technique I love using and stuff like that. So because I love playing jazz standards and stuff like that. So it works for me. So.
That's cool. That's great to have that piano background. That's one class I desperately wish I had taken. I mean, it's not too late to do this stuff, I know, but at Northwestern, Mike Coker, great jazz pianist, teaches down in Arizona now. He had a jazz piano for non-pianists, and it was one of those that would like fill up immediately, and it was just the way he taught was so nuts and bolts. I took improv lessons with him, so I got a bit of that magic, Mike Coker teaching, but that's I never realized how much I would be playing piano until I got out and started doing a lot of teaching. And then especially like the high school orchestra thing, like I play, I'm not a pianist in any way, shape or form, but I've learned how to like hack my way through a score in front of a bunch of 17-year-olds and do something useful. But it's what I remember just watching. I used to work with a few different youth orchestras in Chicago, and one of the other conductors was a talented pianist, and he would whip out these arrangements so easily. He'd just sit down in front of Finale and just turn on the record button and just play. And I thought like, oh man, as I'm like hunting and pecking my arrangements in, he's like lapped me 6 times.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, the piano, I mean, like for jazz, I get in jazz, like I think jazz majors are required to take piano and stuff like that. And again, those, because you're not going to play an altered chord if you can't if you're not used to the sound and stuff like that. So they enforce you. Even when I was at McGill, they enforced you to play a little bit of piano and I guess I took some piano lessons and like when I was younger, so enough that like I could play like some plunk out some chords and stuff like that. And at jazz parties, I'm like if the time is right and stuff, so like I'll jump in and play and stuff like that. So, but yeah, it's mostly a tool for arranging and composition.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I love the new album. Let's have this be the first of many chats if you're down, because you're doing so many projects. The person who holds the podcast record so far is another Eastman graduate, Danny Zeman.
Oh, I know Danny.
Yeah, I think Danny's been on 7 times, and the reason why he just keeps doing all these projects. So it's like, well, so I would love it's an open door. It's like a Tonight Show kind of policy. So like
awesome, it's the base Tonight Show.
Yeah. Fumi, thank you so much. Folks, check out everything he's up to, including the new album at fumitomita.com. We've got it linked up in the show notes and anywhere you get your music. Definitely follow along. And I'm going to be following along. I love having new people on the podcast. Where I have a lot of people back time and time again, and that's fun too. But it's just such a great outlet for me to discover new music and chat with people that are paths have intersected or not to varying degrees, but we certainly haven't sat down for a focused conversation for an hour. And it's just great. I had a great time chatting with Fumi. I just love that about the podcast. And the more I do it, the more I realize I have to explore. I could do one of these every single day or multiple a day, and I never run out of people to talk to, let alone coming back and revisiting past guests. So thank you for listening. Some of you out there have listened to a lot of these podcasts, and it's kind of crazy if you think about the body of work, and that sounds pretentious, but I don't mean it in that way, that has come from me just sitting down over Zoom like I do now, or in person, which is way more fun, and chatting and learning. And what I've learned through this, it's kind of hard to comprehend. It kind of hurts my head if I think about it, so I don't think about it too much. But one thing I have been thinking about a lot, why do I keep waiting to the end to mention my discoverable bass course? I got to get better at this, and I'll be brief because I know that people who listening to this probably know about it, but it was so cool to do this course with Jeff Chalmers. Whether or not you are a beginner, whether or not you're interested in a bass course from me, definitely check out not just what I've been doing with Discover Double Bass, which I'm quite proud of, but everything that Jeff and the team have been doing over there. It could not be more professional, the outfit that Jeff is running there. And I just think it's such an interesting way to learn. And I have gone through most of the courses myself as a student, and I revisit those materials, whether it's fractal fingering from David Allen Moore or Katie Thoreau's Beginner to Bandstand. They're part of my routine. I love them. I love what he does there, and I'm just so proud to be a part of it. So check it out if you haven't, and I'll try to remember to talk about it in the intro. Sorry, Jeff and everybody who would like me to do that. But let's quickly thank the team who puts these together. They are Michael Cooper, Steve Henchy, Trevor Jones, Mitch Morning, and Krista Copper. Mitch makes beautiful basses just east of Dallas-Fort Worth in Kilgore, Texas. And you can learn more about what he does and his award-winning basses at mitchmoring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.